out of all of the games announced for Switch 2 in the April 2nd Switch 2 showcase, I think Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment is the one people are really just not talking about. No one seems to care about this game, and to be fair, it's our third Hyrule Warriors game. It's our fifth Nintendo crossover Warriors game, so naturally fatigue, I think, is setting in, especially after Age of Calamity did a lot that I think Zelda fans weren't exactly happy about. However, I actually think there's a lot of reasons to be excited for this game in particular, following the success of Dynasty Warriors Origins. One of my favorite games of 2025 so far was Dynasty Warriors Origins, and it evolves the formula so much that it really has me excited to see what Koei Tecmo and this new AAA studio does with Age of Imprisonment. So that's what we're talking about today. Of course, if you are new here and you enjoy Zelda content, but also Nintendo Switch 2 news and coverage, I would appreciate you subscribing. Let's get into it. Alrighty, folks, welcome back to the channel. I hope your day is going well. So, Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment, like I said, I think this is really the most slept on announcement, and maybe that's for good reason, because it is just another Warriors game. However, today I want to pitch the idea to you that this game is actually much more exciting than even I thought it would be. For years, really, I've been saying we are going to get a Hyrule Warriors Tears of the Kingdom Age of Imprisoning kind of game, and lo and behold, it actually happens. I have been wanting a Xenoblade Warriors, or maybe even something else entirely, and when talking about Hyrule Warriors, even though I thought it would happen because Age of Calamity sold so well, I was hopeful they would go back to doing like a full crossover again like the first game was. I actually much preferred that for the Hyrule Warriors formula. But even me, as someone who loves Warriors games, I really didn't want this specific outcome to happen. It being the Imprisoning War is cool. However, Age of Calamity did so much wrong, in my opinion, especially when you talk about how the game wasn't canon. It was a what-if story. I was just very skeptical of another one of these from this team. However, the story is the first thing we need to talk about here, and that is the fact that they've already confirmed it actually will be canon. Age of Imprisonment is going to follow the canon events of the time when Zelda was in the past with Rauru and Minoru and all the old champions. It's going to follow the canon storyline. That is what they're saying right now. We will see if that changes closer to release. So here's what the official description reads from Nintendo. They say Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment is the newest title in the Hyrule Warriors series and is developed by Koei Tecmo Games with support from Nintendo. The game features epic battles against hordes of enemies as it tells the untold story from Hyrule's distant past of the Imprisoning War that ultimately led to the events of The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. Fans of the Zelda series, as well as players of both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, can experience the thrill of battle in this canonical tale featuring Princess Zelda, King Rauru, and other familiar characters. Fight for Hyrule's future when Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment comes to Nintendo Switch 2 this winter. So even in like this very short official blurb about the game, they are advertising that it is a canonical tale, meaning that they took the feedback to Age of Calamity very seriously. Now, if I'm not mistaken, with Age of Calamity's marketing, they never said it was going to be a canon story. I know some people are still skeptical of this claim about Age of Imprisonment being canonical. I don't think they ever said that for Age of Imprisonment. All they had said was it was going to be a story set 100 years ago, or whatever the case was. I don't think they ever used the word canon. Now, I suppose you could look at this and say, well, maybe it's canonical to Age of Calamity, right? Maybe this is going to be a sequel to Age of Calamity following the events of that game, but I'm personally going to take their word for it, and when they say it's the events leading up to Tears of the Kingdom, I think it will literally be the canon events, not a what-if story leading up to Tears of the Kingdom. It's not going to have a bunch of random characters thrown in there for fan service. It will likely be a canon story, which leaves me with a lot of questions of how they can fluff up this game's content, especially in regards to the character roster, because really, there's not like a ton of characters they have to play around with. However, looking at the full character roster for Age of Calamity, even that game with its time travel shenanigans, even that game didn't really have that many characters to play as, even with all of the DLC included. So I don't think a Warriors game inherently needs to have a massive roster. And what I really learned while playing Dynasty Warriors Origins is that it really doesn't matter, you know? Dynasty Warriors Origins, you play as this one character the entire time. Of course, you can change his weapons, which changes his playstyle, and there's a whole different skill tree and everything. It's a lot of fun. If there's even just like 10 characters, which off the top of my head, you have Zelda, Rauru, Sonya, you have Minoru, you have the 4 OG champions, you have Ganondorf, who will likely be playable, maybe not in the campaign, but at some points. you can definitely do a lot here, even with a roster of like 10 to 15 characters. So it doesn't need to have, 50 to 100 like a lot of other Warriors games. If they go really in depth with like skill trees and stuff and really have each character feel unique and have them evolve over the course of the game with new moves that you unlock and new weapons and stuff like that, a small roster does not inherently mean less quality, right? If they are going to go for a quality over quantity approach, I'm perfectly okay with that because, like I said, with Dynasty Warriors Origins, you really just play as the one character. You have some team-up moves, and sometimes you'll be playing as another Dynasty Warriors character for a little bit. But for the most part, you're playing as one character the entire time, and even though I put like 40 hours into that game, finishing up the story, just doing one route, it still didn't get old, right? Because you are constantly switching weapons. So if there's like 10 to 15 characters here, I don't really view that as a negative thing or like a limitation of it being set during the canonical Imprisoning War. I do question their ability to hold back on including Link in this game because unless I'm forgetting something, there's really no way for them to make Link playable canonically, right? Maybe he'll be an unlockable at the end of the game, kind of just a fun little extra, but like, are we really going to get a Hyrule Warriors game where Link isn't playable? That almost feels unbelievable to me if that ends up being the case. So I wonder if they do something where maybe not part of the campaign or the story here, but maybe once you finish it, you unlock a Link because we just got Echoes of Wisdom. But even then, like, Link is in Echoes of Wisdom, like you don't play as him much beyond the opening beginning section, but he's in the game. Are we really about to get a Hyrule Warriors game where Link just isn't playable? That just does not feel right to me. So I imagine they'll figure out some way to work him in at the very least. I just don't want to see Yunobo. I don't want to see Yunobo coming back to this game. I don't want to see Sidon playable during the Imprisoning War. That is silly. That is total nonsense fan fiction. As long as they keep it pretty streamlined to the characters that were actually there, and then I will give them the pass on Link at some point because you gotta have Link playable. That is fine with me. That being said, one of my biggest issues with Age of Calamity is that it ran really poorly. Of course, they're taking the Breath of the Wild art style, and it like in a screenshot, it looks really cool. It's like, oh wow, we got a Warriors game that looks just like Breath of the Wild. However, it ran really bad. I usually do not care too much if a game has some frame drops. I'm playing a game on Switch right now that is constantly dropping frames, and yeah, it's like, okay, whatever, it's kind of annoying, but it's not like ruining the experience for me. Age of Calamity ran so poorly that it genuinely took away from my enjoyment of that game. Like, I would say a considerable amount, because it is a Warriors game. You're killing hundreds and thousands of enemies on screen at any given moment. Having the frame rate fall apart and that really takes away from the experience, in my opinion. And it was weird because Fire Emblem Warriors ran pretty fine. Three Hopes especially ran fine. Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition ran fine. I guess it was really just adapting that Breath of the Wild art style to Age of Calamity that it just did not mesh well with the Warriors gameplay or something there. They just couldn't get it running as well as it should have been, because Three Hopes, which came out, 2 years later, that ran pretty well, all things considered. So the hope here with Age of Imprisonment is that it runs way better. Now, from the little bit we've seen of like the Blood Moon Rising and all the enemies spawning in, even the trailer doesn't look the best from the very small little snippets we saw, but it's Switch 2, new hardware, much more powerful hardware. Hopefully it runs at least significantly better than Age of Calamity did. Even if they're just targeting 60 FPS, that's still a leap in the right direction versus Age of Calamity's like 15 FPS that it constantly was running at. So the performance alone will make this game a lot better than Age of Calamity was, in my opinion. But even though I was someone who didn't really want Age of Imprisonment to happen, I'm optimistic because Fire Emblem Warriors 3 Hopes was so good, and especially Dynasty Warriors Origins. I've played Warriors games off and on my entire life. It wasn't until recently I started playing the Dynasty Warriors games proper, but growing up I played like the One Piece Pirate Warriors games and stuff like that, of course, the Nintendo crossovers. And up until recently, even though I enjoyed them, I think junk food is a pretty good descriptor of a Warriors game. You either like it or you don't. It's kind of just mindless fun, going around all the different checkpoints and clearing out bases, fighting the commanders, going through hordes of enemies. It's very mindless. That, for me, really changed with Fire Emblem Warriors 3 Hopes, but especially with Dynasty Warriors Origins, where the quality bar for a Warriors game has increased like tenfold. Like, they have really stepped their game up, in my opinion, in terms of making these games feel more special and like more like an event. Like you're going through an actual journey here with unique story moments. I think Three Hopes is a better game than Three Houses. I think the Warriors gameplay fits the story of Fire Emblem better. I also think the story in Three Hopes is better. The monastery in that game is better. I love Three Hopes. I really, really enjoyed that game. And Dynasty Warriors Origins, that's the real focal point here. they have completely redone it, where, yes, it is still mindless, you're slashing through enemies, but they've added such more of a focus on, like, the personal one-on-one encounters with the enemy commanders, where you have all your parries and stuff. The combat has been refined to a point where, yes, if you put it on easy, it's still going to be easy. You're still just going to be slashing through hordes of enemies like there's no tomorrow. But my experience with Dynasty Warriors Origins is that they refined it just enough to where there are moments where you feel like a god going through the hordes of enemies, but there are also those really personal one-on-one encounters where sometimes you'll literally be in like a circle with like a boss health bar fighting another enemy commander or something. The combat in Origins, it felt so evolved from what we had seen before, and just the way the game is presented in general. You have this really cool world map you're going around, you have all these side quests popping up. The presentation in terms of cutscenes was better than anything we've seen before in a Warriors game. If any of that stuff carries over to Age of Imprisonment, it will almost inherently be the best Nintendo Warriors game. So that alone has me very excited. Now, we don't know if that will be the case. We don't know if Age of Imprisonment will adopt a lot of that new next-gen stuff that Origins has. It is not being developed by Omega Force, seemingly. In the trailer, they say AAA studio. This is a new team within Koei Tecmo, seemingly. So there is certainly a chance that this falls more in line with the previous Nintendo Warriors games in terms of gameplay and progression versus a Dynasty Warriors Origins, which Omega Force just released. But the hope is that this game was being developed in tandem with Origins, and they're able to adopt a lot of the new gameplay features of Origins into Age of Imprisonment. So for me, the reason I'm much more excited in this game than I would have been otherwise is because the Warriors formula has just evolved a lot since even Age of Calamity released 4.5 years ago. Three Hopes and Origins, at least in my opinion, are way better than any Warriors game that came before. And even with Age of Calamity, even though I have a lot of issues with that game, with the story, with the performance, they were on the right track of making these hyper-specific Warriors games that work as a companion to a mainline title. While I definitely love the fan service of, let's say, the regular Hyrule Warriors games, it's hard to deny that getting much more personal with the characters and having a more proper story alongside it, it does lend itself to just a better game overall, even if I do love the insane crossover fan service of other Warriors games. The issue with Age of Calamity was, well, they were trying to do that, but then they still made it fan service-y and non-canon, which was really weird. So I am personally very excited for Age of Imprisonment. It's also just like a little bittersweet because we're getting the 4K remasters of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom on launch day for Switch 2. But after that, Age of Imprisonment might be our final peek into this Hyrule and this Zelda and these characters. So while I'm personally pretty tired of this entire setting, it is a setting I love. Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, some of my favorite games ever made. This is going to be our final stop along the road with these characters. So it is a little bittersweet from that angle. We don't know the exact release date yet. I'm predicting a November or even late October release for Age of Imprisonment because they said winter 2025 in the trailer, and there was definitely some speculation that maybe it will release in January or February. But I just don't think so. I think you look at the holiday lineup for Switch 2 this year, and while Hyrule Warriors isn't this system seller like a regular Zelda game is, it definitely helps because Age of Calamity was the best-selling Warriors game, or is the best-selling Warriors game. I'm pretty sure it sold over 4 million copies or so. So this is no doubt going to be a massive success on Switch 2 this holiday as your first premier Zelda game there. But yeah, I'm thinking it's going to release in like November, maybe late October. They said winter, and winter technically isn't until late December. So maybe it could be a December release, but I do think it will release this calendar year. So let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Are you excited for Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment? I wanted to make a video on it because I feel like nobody is talking about it. Even like Zelda people that I follow don't even care about this game. But as a Zelda fan, as a Breath of the Wild Tears fan, and as a Warriors fan, while before it was announced I was skeptical, I think there's actually a lot of reasons to be excited for this game. So let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Of course, subscribe here for more Zelda content and Nintendo Switch 2 news and coverage, all that fun stuff. Follow me on Twitter at BoTalksGames. Check out my Nintendo collecting channel at It's Amiibo. And as always, you can click on one of these two videos to listen to me ramble about even more Nintendo stuff. Until next time, folks, peace.